You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Feel like who art ed?
We'll try to slice it.
Who art ed? Mr. Wood art ed me.
Good. Either way, it's ambiguous. It works on so many levels.
I know.
That's off to a great start.
Welcome to Who Arted, weekly art history for all ages. I'm your host, Kyle Wood, and today we're looking at the French Post-Impressionist painter Henri Rousseau. Henri Julien Félix Rousseau was born May 21st, 1844, in Laval, France. He's one of the most famous examples of a self-taught artist. He had no formal artistic training and didn't use traditional academic techniques for accurate proportions, anatomy, or linear perspective. Instead, Rousseau's style had flat planes of color, highly detailed but stylized foliage that gave it a collage-like feel and a dreamlike atmosphere. He's best known for his large-scale, vivid jungle scenes featuring exotic animals and mysterious figures, despite the fact that the art world at his time was largely focused on impressionists, capturing fleeting light, moments in time, and, of course, the visible brushstrokes. For most of his life, Rousseau treated art as largely a hobby. He attended schools in Laval, served in the French army from 1863 to 67, and eventually moved to Paris, where he took a government job as a toll collector. He didn't begin painting seriously until his early 40s. Because he was completely self-taught, he applied paint in what was kind of an unconventional style at the time. He was very deliberate and step-by-step painting one color at a time across the entire canvas before moving on to the next. By the late 19th century, his paintings began to catch the eye of the Parisian avant-garde. While the general public and traditional critics laughed at the work, younger, groundbreaking artists like Picasso, Henri Matisse, and the poet Apollinaire celebrated Rousseau for his pure, unfiltered artistic vision. Now, here are 5 quick things to know about Henri Rousseau. Number 1. While he's famous for his exotic jungle paintings, Rousseau never left France. To create his famous jungle scenes, Rousseau relied entirely on his imagination and resources available in Paris. He frequently visited the Jardin Les Plantes, a botanical garden with extensive greenhouses that housed exotic plants from around the world. He once told an art critic that when he went into the greenhouses and saw the strange plants of exotic lands, it seemed to him that he was entering a dream. He studied the broad leaves, ferns, and lotuses, sketching them meticulously to use later in his studio. For the animals in his paintings, Rousseau visited the nearby Museum of Natural History to study taxidermy specimens of lions, tigers, and monkeys. He also relied heavily on popular print media of the era. He collected postcards, children's books, and illustrated magazines that had pictures of wild animals and foreign landscapes. By combining these different sources, he was able to construct a composite jungle that was biologically impossible but visually stunning, placing African animals next to American houseplants. Number 2. Rousseau was entirely self-taught and took on painting later in life. While many of his contemporaries studied at Beaux-Arts or apprenticed under master painters, Rousseau learned to paint simply by doing it. He didn't pick up a paintbrush with serious intent until he was about 40 years old, though. In 1893, at the age of 49, he took an early retirement from his government job, surviving on a small pension to dedicate himself entirely to his art. He occasionally supplemented his income playing the violin on the streets and giving drawing or music lessons to local children. Because he lacked formal training, his technique was kind of unorthodox. Academic painters used complex underpainting and glazing techniques to create depth and realistic atmospheric perspective. Rousseau painted with solid, opaque layers, often finishing the sky first and then moving forward into the foreground, painting leaf by leaf. He didn't understand traditional perspective, which resulted in figures that appeared to float in proportions that were just frankly unrealistic. But this lack of the traditional skills also is what gave his work its signature modern graphic quality. Number 3. Rousseau was mocked by the public and traditional art critics during his lifetime. Starting in 1886, Rousseau exhibited his work regularly at the Salon des Indépendants. This was an unjuried exhibition space in Paris created by artists like Georges Seurat, where anyone could display their art for a fee. Because his work lacked the traditional polish, thousands of visitors would specifically seek out Rousseau's paintings at the Salon just to point and laugh at them. Critics wrote scathing reviews comparing his paintings to scribbles of children and questioning his sanity. Fortunately, Rousseau was largely impervious to their mockery. He wanted to be accepted as a great academic painter and often interpreted sarcastic praise from critics as genuine admiration. He kept a scrapbook of his press clippings, seemingly unaware or willfully ignorant of the insults. He genuinely believed he was painting in a highly realistic style. His self-assurance allowed him to continue producing massive, labor-intensive canvases year after year, entirely unbothered by the critics and the art establishment. Number 4. In addition to his visual art, Rousseau was a musician who played the violin, taught music lessons, and composed his own waltz. Before he was able to support himself entirely through his painting, Rousseau supplemented his small government pension by working as a street musician and private tutor. He played the violin in public squares and offered lessons in music, drawing, and diction to children in his Parisian neighborhood. His passion for music was almost as strong as his passion for painting, and he saw the two disciplines as deeply connected. In addition to playing existing music, Rousseau would also write his own compositions. His most notable musical work was a waltz titled Clemence, named after his wife, and he successfully published the sheet music for it in 1886. His passion for music often bled into his visual art, as instruments like flutes and violins appear in many of his jungle scenes and portraits. And finally, number 5. Pablo Picasso threw a legendary banquet in Rousseau's honor. In 1908, a young Pablo Picasso purchased one of Rousseau's paintings, a portrait of a woman, from a second-hand shop. Picasso had bought it for only 5 francs, basically the price of the canvas it was painted on, but he recognized the modern genius in the work. To honor Rousseau, Picasso had a big party in his studio. The banquet was attended by the intellectual elites of Paris, including Gertrude Stein, Georges Braque, and Guillaume Apollinaire. The evening was a chaotic mix of genuine tribute and a bit of ironic mockery. Banners were hung, poems were recited in Rousseau's honor, and Rousseau himself played the violin for the crowd. According to legend, Rousseau was deeply moved and took Picasso aside during the party, saying, quote, "We are the 2 greatest painters of our time, you in the Egyptian style and me in the modern style." Now, on the topic of other artists celebrating Rousseau, the banquet was in 1908, just 2 years later when Rousseau passed away in 1910. He was broke and buried in a pauper's grave, but his friends pooled their money to purchase a permanent burial plot. Apollinaire wrote a poem for the epitaph which asked Rousseau to let their baggage pass duty-free through the gates of heaven, a nod to his career as a toll collector. And then the famous sculptor Constantine Brancusi hand-carved Apollinaire's poem directly into Rousseau's tombstone. Now, I want to take a minute to look at one of Rousseau's great paintings. And for this episode, I want to focus on the Equatorial jungle from 1909. I think it's just a great example of Rousseau's sort of iconic imaginative landscape style. It's oil on canvas, about 55 by 51 inches, currently housed in the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. It was created near the end of Rousseau's life, during a period when he was dedicating his time to producing ambitious jungle scenes to exhibit at the annual Salon des Indépendants in Paris. Like his other jungle works, it was completely from his imagination, utilizing studies from the Parisian botanical gardens rather than any firsthand experience in a tropical rainforest. The composition is completely dominated by dense, oversized, but also meticulously detailed vegetation. Rousseau layered various species of plants to fill the canvas, beginning with sharp, spiky leaves with bright edges at the very bottom. Behind them, massive, broad leaves from a dense wall of greenery reaches all the way up to the top edge. On the left side of the canvas, there's a pop of contrasting pink lotus-like flowers that bloom amongst the leaves with a tall, tiered white flower structure on the right side as sort of a counterbalance. The foliage is so thick, it covers the vast majority of the composition, but we see a small patch of pale sky through the leaves and branches and a tiny, faint moon off in the distance. There are two monkeys peering out from behind the dense leaves, and their faces are partially covered as they blend into the dark shadows of the undergrowth. There's also this small, shadowy, dark red bird perched on a branch in the upper left side. While the animals are present, it's the foliage that really dominates the scene. The pinks of the flowers, the gold edges of the leaves in the foreground, the white flower on the right, those are all the strongest points of contrast, pulling the viewer's focus. The jungle feels like a bigger entity, overtaking the animals and even the sky. The painting was created using Rousseau's methodical process, applying one specific color at a time across the canvas before mixing his next one. And this approach ensured the colors remained distinct, creating flat planes of color with sharp edges. He used dozens of different shades of green to differentiate the overlapping layers of the jungle. And rather than utilizing traditional techniques like atmospheric perspective, which creates the illusion of three-dimensional space by making distant objects appear sort of pale blue and out of focus, Rousseau basically just stacks the leaves and plants. They're overlapping to create a sense of depth, but they're all crisply defined so nothing recedes too far into the background. And this technique sort of compresses the space, making the jungle feel a bit claustrophobic. Ultimately, what I find really interesting about Rousseau's jungle paintings is this dreamlike, sort of uncanny valley vibe. He captures the shapes of all the foliage reasonably well, but the flat stacked style makes it feel like a decorative motif rather than a real space. It's his fantasy of a jungle, and the color is another element that really gives away the fact that this is from imagination rather than observation. It's all just too pale and cool to capture the true equatorial feel. And this is probably what really resonated with the Parisian avant-garde in the early 20th century. The work was pure and earnest, unapologetically focusing on the idiosyncratic ideas and the dreamlike inner world of the artist rather than a faithful representation of the real world. This concludes this week's episode of Who Arted, part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. If you found this tolerable, please leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. You can find images of the work being discussed this week and every week on social media at Who Arted Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, and of course on the website whoartedpodcast.com. Podcast done.